What a wonderful presentation this morning. Thank you so very much, all of you. We've heard about the strengths of places. We've heard about unexpected insights, but we've also heard from all speakers. It's on. About the pitfalls, shortcomings of place. At the outset, even before we opened our mouths, Conrad said cards are stacked against place. Sharon just said there can't be any one concept of place. Places are inherently unstable. I wanted to ask you all, as the 21st century hurdles forward, or at least in some direction, with more and more human beings, more and more strange changes to the weather, we know that more and more people will be displaced and replaced. And if place has been able to serve as both an anchor that grounds us and also and unites us, and as a sail that beckons us on to new possibilities, the question I'd like to pose for this panel, to bring it back to the positive, how can place keep pace as the 21st century develops?
Oh, thank you. That's right. Thanks so much. Yeah, well, I'm a great lover of neighborhood shopping streets. And I've spent several years working with colleagues around the world to study neighborhood shopping streets in 6 global cities. And it's not, I could not help but feel both encouraged and discouraged at encouraged by the long history and indestructibility in many ways of the need for a neighborhood public space that could join private motives with public purpose and bring people together, strangers together in a most times peaceful way, and yet it's terrible fragility these days when more people turn to online shopping and neighborhood shopping streets, to the degree they are used and the storefronts are occupied, have become rows of personal service places. I always look for 2 kinds of stores: the hardware store, which has pretty much vanished, and the fresh food store, which has also vanished for similar reasons. Fresh food, not in the sense of a supermarket or a hypermarket, but a small locally owned store that sells fresh food that people go home and and cook. So I'd like to be more optimistic about place. I do see places constantly being remade. I see great need for the physical place of housing, as well as workspace. But I'm pessimistic about being able to build place and maintain place in a way that is satisfying to existing populations. So that's thanks for that downer to begin with. Yeah.
No, so I can do more. I'll do some balancing too. So we have spatial injustice, right? So for a lot of people I work with, they experience root shock, right? I look at gentrification. So root shock is a concept. I want to say Mindy full of love, but I'm losing names. It's, so it's the idea of being right displaced from where you are. Thank you. I appreciate that. And then what we look at too, there's a movement in aging studies and sociology of aging and gerontology. It's called urban alchemy, which I kind of like. It's this idea that, and it's mostly on the backs, unfortunately, of women and women who are racialized as African American, rebuilding community. right? And so there's this idea of, can we rebuild community at the same time it's being destroyed, right? So it's that mix of, we know that place is unequal. We know people have different access to place, but there's that, and the intersectional characteristics of people and the barriers, but we can also make an attempt to rebuild as a collective, right? So maintain a sense of place that you want, and you own the place as best you can within the structural determinants of place.
So rebuild as we unbuild.
Yes, fight the unbuilding as much as you can with the, the ability you can to rebuild, acknowledging that you may not have absolute power. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think if we think that place is something human and happens at all different scales, its future is assured. I mean, we're all going to be doing it. I mean, there's no future in which we won't be making place in that sense. What kind of places we make? I mean, that's very contextual. I mean, I think in the late 80s, early 90s, one of the biggest things people were writing about was the homogenization of place, that the world was, globalization was creating a difference was being eroded, and so places are more the same everywhere you went. I don't worry so much about that anymore. And I think one of the things that happens is that as you get one thing happening, you get another thing happening. So if you look up like authenticity on a Google Ngram, I wouldn't worry about it until there was a possibility of it not existing. If you look up local Google Ngram, it rises pretty much in use at the same point as global, because people didn't worry about something being local when your average person didn't travel more than 7 miles in their lifetime from where they lived, which was medieval England. So we start to worry about place when this is opposite. I'm kind of interested in versions of localism that are emerging as all this stuff's happening in the 21st century. There's all kinds of localist movements all over. Some of them horrible, and some of them not so horrible. There's the Satayama movement in Japan, which is a place-based agricultural lifestyle using traditional knowledge, and it's becoming quite a thing. There's transition towns. There's all kinds of ways in which the local and place are being made, and some will be successful and some won't be successful. Some will be horrible. And gated communities, all kinds of places that try and enclose themselves and not be open, usually disastrous, whether it's a nation or an individual part of a city. So I don't know the answer, but I just know that it'll continue. The contestation of place, making it, unmaking it, trying to make it to reflect as many people as possible will be an ongoing thing, and we'll be doing it, and we can all be involved in making it better, hopefully.
Thank you. Joyce, you touched on this in your remarks about co-partnering. How do we get better at co-partnering? Seeing people that we might have thought of as adversaries as partners.
It sounds like my dinner time conversations at home.
Okay, I don't know. Sharon, do you want to know?
Well, I'll start. Although really Joyce started, I'll start. For the past few months, and with great vehemence in the past week, New York City has been going through discussions of a package of zoning proposals, zoning changes put forward by the city planning department, which means by the mayor. No matter who the mayor would be, probably the same sort of package would have been proposed under the, I like to say, Orwellian title of City of Yes for Housing Opportunity. Many people, myself included, see this package as a great opportunity for real estate developers, but there are a lot of different interests that are involved in the discussions. So when I'm thinking, when I hear the word partnering, I'm thinking of the impossibility of partnering, the really a life or death conflict that is going on now in the place where I live. So co-partnering, it's like an exotic concept that I will have to consider.
I think it's really difficult. So when I did this photo voice project, I have two groups of older adults who advised me. So one was an advisory group from a person-centered organization. And the other group, I always say historical, but it's Healthier Black Elders from Wayne State. And I'm bad with geography, and I'm sorry, I'm amongst people who know geography very well. So when I began the project, people told me what I did right and what I did wrong. And you have to understand power differential, right? They're going to look at me like, oh, you have a PhD, you know stuff, but I really don't. I don't know the lived experience, right? I don't know. So really can you ever get rid of a power differential? Probably not, right? But you can at least try to eliminate it and get the voices of people that are important and that understand what you're studying or working with. It began for me in the, I was a CUNY alum, right? And so, understanding that this unequal access, right, is how I was grounded and trained, right? So I can't escape it. And then when I had lived in the West, I had people who wanted to work with Navajo Nation and other groups, and they said they co-partnered, and I didn't think so, right? So I saw bad co-partnering into some extent. So I can pick out bad co-partnering or, those kind of things more easily, but I think it's often really important to understand. I mean, the example I'll give you, and I told probably some of the group, one of my students, he was in a facility in a very wealthy part of Colorado that designed a skilled care facility for older adults, and the layout was horrible. And so he took photos and he asked, why did you design it this way? And they said, well, it wasn't made for the people who live there. It was made for their families. So they would buy them a place to live there. And people who lived there were horrified. I mean, I have visions of the art and it was bad, right? So co-partnering with people and say, what would you like when you live in a place and it's your place would be more valuable than let's design this and have people move in and say, this is totally not bueno, right? It's not going to fly. So, but I'm sure you have personal. If you want to share one,
I'm not going there, not going there. I'd like to say in general, I mean, I think that, I mean, other than the research process, I think the process of placemaking in its broadest meaning it should involve co-partnering with stakeholders, to use the jargon, as much as possible. And I think about one of the things that has to emerge in the process of how we make our places is an inclusive process that has those various levels of social justice, the justice of equality, procedural justice, all the way down, so that the people who have, particularly the people that are already in a place, are places that are people that have power over the way the places change. But to you can't do. I mean, there are examples of places in world history that were made by authoritarians just will make it and just made it. Mussolini or whatever, and that are now successful places. I mean, you can make a successful place by accident. In fact, most successful places are accidental. But I do think that we should involve as many people as possible in that process.
This amazing crowd must have questions. Yes, I see in the back.
Sorry, I'll have to walk up to every single. Oh. Katie Nelson will walk up to every single person.
Who's the first one?
Hi, I'm an alumni of the school here, and 26 years ago, I moved to the DC area, and I really appreciate Joyce's comments about Baltimore in particular. And there's a place in Baltimore called Howard Street, and 26 years ago, Howard Street was a very scary place, and it is still. And many years ago, Howard Street was the center of shopping for Baltimore. Everyone went to Howard Street to go shopping, and all the shops, were active with places that you remember from movies that you see. And 26 years ago, all of those shops were boarded up. And it's really kind of interesting because you talk about how to co-partner. And I was involved in a project where we created, I think, 50 units in 5 different sort of storefronts that were 200 feet deep. All 5 of those were really scary to go in when we started the project. One of them was practically bombed out. But the only way that project was possible was there was an architect, an investor, a developer, a builder, and then the government gave a historic tax credit to restore those 5 storefronts. And, you know, it did take a co-partnership. The developer wouldn't have been able to do it on their own because there's not the return on investment. So the key, really the key to that particular project was the co-partnering. So I just thought I'd offer that comment because it's a unique project. And
Yes, it's not a question, but it's a very good comment.
yeah,
Thank you.
and if you could just comment about maybe you know, how to partner with the government rather than saying, well, it's impossible, but you know, there are ways.
That's out of my league. That's out of my scope, Sharon. Is it your scope?
I mean, I think you pointed to it. By the way, I'm dying to know what went into the that space, what it became. Uh, oh yes. Oh. Oh, okay. 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 I mean, several people have pointed to the money, right? I mean, you need the investment, and that has to come from somewhere. The Kickstarter can be government, right? I mean, usually the public sector tries to put in a little money, and I mean, in terms of urban redevelopment, tries to put in a little money to mobilize the private sector to put in more money. This is, you know, this can, but this also is usually very contentious. I mean, you know, we're thinking now about, say, public housing projects in New York City. New York City is one of the US cities that built extensive public housing projects. I mean, in ways that are problematic, but they built them and they don't have the money to maintain the structures. So where's the money going to come from? You know, for a long time, neither the state government nor the federal government would ante up enough money to pay for maintenance, or I mean, you know, we're talking about $40 billion worth of of deferred repairs now. So neither the federal nor the state government is putting in the money. The city government, you know, doesn't have the money, and the existing tenants can't pay higher rents. I mean, some of them are having trouble even, you know, keeping up with rent payments now. So what can be done? Some of these projects are sitting on land that is attractive land for middle class and even upper middle class residents. So, you know, they're you know, for some years, proposals to lease the publicly owned land in the middle of public housing projects, the green space and parking lots, to private developers to build mixed income housing. That, you know, that idea has been floated and kind of you know, after a lot of resistance accepted, because there's no other source of funding appearing. But you know, that's a very contentious kind of co-partnering that's taking a long time to develop. So, I mean, there are many examples, I'm sure, all over, of smaller projects like the one you mentioned, where you do get the public sector, the private sector, and, you know, possibly the nonprofit sector involved, and existing residents and so on. I don't know, maybe New York is just a really contentious city, but it's really hard. It's really hard.
It's definitely, it's out of my scope. So here.
Anybody got a question? Taking a question from, one more, there we go.
I think I can make this into a question. So I'm an architect and a planner. And so someone talked about scale. And so I'm thinking about the innovation district and the innovation thing. Now they have a lot of places, but, you know, Detroit and Michigan Central Station has Ford has a big innovation center there. But I'm thinking though of the scale of a house. And my parents, for example, they had to move out of their house in Buffalo to a small apartment, and my kids, you know, a childcare center. So looking at the scale of the innovation, Detroit, cities, downtowns, but really, I think where architects have failed is the scale of a house. And so, place where kids spend a lot of their time, daycare center, childcare centers, or in their house, or older people, but all people. So, I guess my question would be, we're all uh, we're all talking about placemaking and Bryant Park and big public spaces, which is great, but I don't know. So somehow I think we missed the boat in kind of Joyce, what you're saying maybe, especially for older people, the setting where people, they're not going shopping so much when you're in your 80s, and you're not going to cafes, but you're circumscribed to house, and I also think of children the same way. They're not going to have lattes. They're just in a poorly designed childcare center. So that's, I guess, how can we raise that kind of awareness of uh, that responsibility that we have as designers, architects at the scale of a house?
I mean, I think that question of scale is, I mean, one of the things I want to convince people of is to think of place. When we think of place, and we immediately think of what Chat GPT generates, which is really interesting because it's like it looks like a public square that has had a placemaking exercise in a city somewhere in North America. So it didn't design a bedroom, or that's what it did. And places are all of these scales. And I think that if we think about place across these scales, and as not so much as a thing, but as a process and as a way of attaching ourselves to the world, then we start to think about houses, rooms, all of these things in different ways. One of the things I guess in the US context is the fixation on certain kind of idea of what a house is, which is this automobile dependent large house with a garden around it for a single family, which then becomes a retired couple or a single person or whatever. And I think that is, when people travel, they see other things. And obviously, you see things differently if you go to Manhattan or to major urban conglomerations in the US. But that is a very American or North American thing. And I think that is an alienating and atomizing structure that we need more people thinking about forms of co-housing and living together. That works very successfully in other places. Talk about governments involved in things. We have a limited imagination of what governments can do. They do horrible things all the time. They invent tax increment financing districts and make up money out of nothing, out of some to get gentrification and renewal to happen. Or they're Vienna, and they produce a place which has 75% of the people living in social housing because they love it so much. It involved thinking about how you do things, or even council estates made in the UK after World War II or after World War One. Hundreds of thousands of people were brought up in these and loved these places without varying roof lines, that were so successful that Thatcher wanted to sell them all. Right? Governments can do all kinds of different things. Sorry, that's the previous point, but you're the house person.
Oh no, me?
Thank you for being in this place. Yes, and Tim brings up something that I'd like to add to um, the statement that architects are neglecting housing, which I've heard also before. So there must be something to that. But Tim raises an excellent point that I want to emphasize. I think a major problem of place building, placemaking today involves congregate housing, or housing for more than a single person or a single household. One of the most interesting small scale congregate living places I've seen in recent years is a small apartment complex for older people in Stockholm. And that made me think this is a really nice way for older people to live together. I can't remember exactly, but it seems to me that there were no residents of that place who needed a lot of physical medical care. That's nice. And then what about homeless people? I mean, one of the major problems in all cities today is housing, in some way putting a roof over the head of homeless people. And in New York City, the most resistance in neighborhoods to locating congregate housing is the congregate part of the housing. The scale of bringing 200 homeless people, many of whom may have mental health problems and physical problems, bringing them into a neighborhood. And then usually the rules of these shelters dictate that the people who sleep there at night can't be there during the day. So there are no places for them to live in during the day, only to sleep in at night. So I'm thinking that this is this area of congregate housing, or I don't know what, multiple dwelling units, that's the area of perhaps greatest social concern these days. And that's, where we have to concentrate.
I think we have to wrap it up.
Oh, sure.
Gone beyond the place limits placed upon us. But it's been a marvelous session. I thank you all three so much. What a pleasure and an honor to be with you. And let's perhaps leave it with the 4 words: rebuild as we unbuild. And we will see each other in a few minutes. Thank you.